Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello and welcome to Talking About Books. My name's Robert Jaquay.
And I'm Richard Naylor.
And today we're going to be doing something we haven't done before. We're going to be talking about a specific book in a conversation between each other, and we're going to focus on a very special book.
Their Eyes, We're Watching God by Nora Hurston.
This book was picked as a part of a program from the National Endowment for the Humanities called The Big Read, and the Upper Hudson Library System decided to embrace this particular book and create a whole series of programs around it. So we thought we'd add our contribution and actually discuss the book or talk about the book.
We didn't really want to do a book discussion group as a whole group because we have a difficult time getting a whole group of people who really want to be on television. We don't expect to say everything about this book. We can't really sum it up. We're not the experts on the book. We don't have PhDs in literature. However, that being said, we both love literature. We've read the book twice and studied about it, and we really are looking forward to talking about it.
One of the things also, Richard, and I think you'll agree, is that we're not sure that people who are watching us right now have read the book. Hopefully, after we do talk about it, you'll want to read the book, and if you have read the book, you'll join us in our conversation and benefit from it.
I think we wanted to start with the author.
Okay.
To give a little background.
Yes.
The more I read about Zora Neale Hurston, the more impressed I am, because she started out with a father who was a minister and a carpenter, a mother who was a seamstress, but her mother died when she was 13, and at that point the new wife didn't really like her. Now we're not going to go into a lot of detail, but the point is she had to work her way through life, and at the same time she maintained a love or a desire to get a degree.
Okay.
She got her high school at 27, I think it was.
Right. And also, we were talking before about this, the idea that, with probably a shaky, beginning education, she had natural talents that obviously she wanted to explore, and she did enroll into college eventually, and into Howard University.
In fact, she enrolled almost immediately after finishing high school.
And good fortune shined upon her because after that, she actually went to New York City, right?
Right.
She had to drop out of her first college because of
lack of money.
Lack of money. And she goes to New York City and she gets involved with
the Harlem Renaissance.
Okay.
Now the Harlem Renaissance, we could have read several books on that. But to sum it up, the black population had been freed from slavery in the 19th century. But there was a long way to go to create a middle class and a group of writers. That would have been pretty much impossible in the beginning. Gradually, Zora Neale Hurston was one. She wanted to get an education, she wanted to write, and she wanted to write something about her people and her type of problems.
Now, just for the sake of time, frame, this is the 1920s we're talking about, right? Okay.
Right. And that pretty much ended when everything just about went bankrupt in 1929. And she got to New York in the mid-20s, just in the heat of everything, and immediately found that her articles were wanted in some of the magazines back then.
So people recognized that she actually had a talent.
Right.
And the benefit from this involvement was that she got to go to Barnard College, right?
She was recognized by an important person, I can't remember their name, but that person paid for her tuition at this point and eventually allowed her to take a trip to Haiti. And this was an anthropologist.
That's right, very influential in her life.
And so they sent her down there to collect anthropological film and to interview people about their lives. The interview didn't go very well because she spoke a Barnard English, not at all what the people down there were expecting. However, she collected a lot of film footage.
Okay, and in that particular period, she wrote?
In that particular period, as we read, I think it was 7 months she completed this book.
7 weeks.
7 weeks, I'm sorry. That sounds even more impossible.
Right, right. Okay, so we're talking about this particular book, and we'll go a little bit more into, you know, what she's created here. But let's just step back a little bit and say, you know, why did the Upper Hudson system decide that among the choices that they wanted to embrace this book? There was an important collaboration they were seeking to have, right?
I think that was the key. Nobody in this group really knew, I shouldn't say nobody, most of the people in the group didn't know this book. And it was something fresh, so that was a positive. It involved feminism, it involved blacks, it involved a lot of things that are still issues today. And also, the Writers Institute had a contact, the niece, or the aunt, I'm not quite sure,
I think
niece of the writer was available to come and do programs.
Okay, so, you know, making that collaboration made it even more enticing for the Upper Hudson system to say, this is the book we want to do.
Absolutely.
And there are about 100 programs throughout the whole month of May that are devoted to this particular work and things surrounding it.
Probably the best way to find out is just go to the Big Read website that we put on the Upper Hudson. We can put that on the screen to make it easier, but it's www.uhls.org/bigread.
Big Read.
Right.
Okay. All right, get to this book, a book that was written in 7 weeks.
1937 it came out.
Okay, and here we have a woman who's educated. She has an anthropological background, and she sort of broke away from the type of literature that was being created in the Harlem Renaissance with this particular book. I'll express it this way, that a lot of what was happening, I believe, in the literature of the Harlem Renaissance was to, in essence, talk about the, and I'm going to use the word sameness, that even though we're talking about blacks, we're talking about black culture, there was an attempt to sort of let people know that we're not really that different from you, okay? But this author just said, wait a minute, we are different. Okay, we may have the same kind of things that we go through in life, but we are different. So she took a big risk and really alienated herself, didn't she?
Well, a lot of that was the politics of the time. If you painted things the way they really were, it might not look as rosy as someone would like. So if you want to cultivate a group of people and say, we deserve to have a better life, you don't want to show somebody committing a murder to be very prejudiced and hateful and gossipy. You want to show someone who's in pain or who's suffered and who's worked hard and they really deserve your sympathy. She did both. And so it shocked some of the people who wanted to promote the black cause.
Right, and there are some criticisms along the way here, but I think what this woman did was very daring and very bold, and she stuck to her guns, so to speak, and really created a masterful work that really does capture, you know, a community of people, characters that I certainly wouldn't have known otherwise.
And I think that was one of the most remarkable things that happened with this. Many of the people who read the book said, I never would have read that book.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, now let's get into the book here.
That's good.
Okay, now we have a story that you know, if you look at the analysis and the commentaries, that really deals with someone's journey. You know, the main character's journey. Janie Crawford, right?
Janie Crawford.
Okay, and in the thing that we've been showing on our channel this previous week here, we also, there was a mention in there that it was much like the what Twain did with Huckleberry Finn.
Going down the river.
So we had sort of like a road trip, but
right.
in a different way.
Well, in this case, it would be the river of life. That wasn't my first analogy that came, but certainly there is a trip, and she goes the whole distance, and we find an ending that seems very appropriate.
Structurally, it's very interesting too, and it really harkens back to a very classic way of telling a story.
This was a little embarrassing, or maybe surprising, because when they talk about a romance, what was that first word? They likened it to a medieval romance classic, and so we have a picture in the slide or the video that we did of Lancelot lying on a bed, and you're wondering how does that fit in with the black experience?
Right.
You came up with an interesting idea, I thought, in the quest, And it was called the quest romance.
That's
what
it.
I was trying to
You got
get
it, right.
before. The quest really is important in the sense that what are we searching? And in the past, this has always been a little bit interesting. Is it a fleece, or was it something more meaningful? Was it love? Was it self-fulfillment?
Or was it self?
Or was it self?
Okay. And
Maybe we're there.
Maybe we're there. And it starts out basically with you meet our character at a certain point in her life, and it's a very dramatic, very beautiful opening. She's basically walking by a group of women, or has walked by a group of women who are on the porch, and they're sort of talkers and talk about anything. And she doesn't engage with them. Okay, so something's amiss here. And she moves along, and she meets up with a woman named Phoebe. Okay, and then after a few things happen, she begins to tell Phoebe her story, or a story.
So in a way, it's a flashback.
It's a
we
flashback.
See the beginning, and
we
then
fade back
right.
now.
I think we should maybe do a little structure to the story, so
Okay.
people have an idea about what are they talking about at this point. And we said it was a quest, but maybe to sum it up, a woman with 3 husbands.
Yep.
The first 2 were not good. The last was good. But in between, how does she go from one to the other, and what does she go through, and why is she disappointed?
And how does she break away from the conventions of the time? You know, for having the first marriage be one that was in effect arranged for her, and you know she was to behave like all other women would be in that kind of relationship or in a marriage, and something within inside of her says, nope, not going to do this, and she breaks away. Okay, so you know we have somebody who changes and evolves herself through the 3 stages. Shall we call them the 3 stages?
Sounds good.
Since there are 3 distinct relationships, but the most significant relationship in the whole book is the one that's hers. It's her own self. I believe, finding herself. That's my feeling anyway.
I really agree. The middle husband, we should get to him. Well, let's go through
Okay.
the 3, I
Okay.
guess. The first person is an arranged marriage. So we go in a little more detail. And it was to please her grandmother that she called Nanny.
Nanny, right.
Well, Nanny was raped by white people in the beginning. Her daughter was also raped. And so Nanny wants to give a better life to Janie. And what she conceives as a better life is something like being taken care of, having enough money, and in the image that she has, being able to sit in a rocking chair on a porch and rock and do anything you want, but she just sees it as rocking. Now, Janie wants romance. We defined it
And how do we find that out?
carefully, and self. Well, that gets back to the second scene in the book, which is really dramatic. Janie is lying in the grass under a blossoming pear tree, and she looks up and she's just awed by the beauty. But then she sees a bee, and it goes into the open petal. And this is an incredibly moving scene. It demonstrates the poetry of the author, using a black idiom. And it's an interesting counterpoint to see the rough language with the
Yes.
absolutely beautiful images that came out of it.
And it's stunning, and we know exactly what she's talking about. I mean, this is the awakening that from adolescence into, you know, women, you know, the longing kind of thing, and the idea that this is marriage.
And maybe to sum it up in one really short 4-letter word, love.
Love.
Not love in the, we loved that person, but true passionate love.
So she was willing to give the first marriage a try, even though it was, you know, probably
For Grandma.
not for Grandma. Probably not the person she would have chosen had she had a choice.
Right, and one of the images in black literature of the time was the mule. The mule is the animal that carries the burden. He's not well treated necessarily. As long as he can pull the plow, he's welcome. Now, that image was then in the black community turned to the woman, because after the man's free from the white domination, he gives it to the black woman to carry. You bring in the wood. And that brings his self-esteem up.
Now, the character's name is wonderful. I mean, I love the character's names in this book anyway, but Logan Killix is his name. Okay, and this is the man that she has been, selected for her to marry.
Well, it starts with kill. It's not, unless you're Dutch, that's not good.
But he's a hard-working man.
He's a hard-working man. He has 60 acres.
And a mule.
And a mule, and he wants another mule or two. And one of them is a mule so that Phoebe can become a mule and work with this mule, which is the end for her. She was willing to tolerate a loveless, passionless marriage to someone who was very practical and old and is about as attractive as a tree, but not one in bloom, just a gnarly old tree.
Now, this is where I feel she, the character, does something that, is really unexpected, and that is that she decides she's not going to do this any longer because she meets somebody who is totally different. A dandy, a guy that sort of, captures her. And she even says to Logan at one point in time, she says, perhaps I should do this. Perhaps basically I should leave you, or forewarns him. And by golly, she decides to do it. And I think that's really an important thing. I mean, brave to say the least.
This was a little shocking from the point of view of she got married in the church or Western tradition, but one morning she just walks on down the road. She takes her apron off, puts it over the fence, and she walks off with this person.
As we're talking, I keep thinking about things that we probably should have said before, but one of the things, let's talk about the image of this woman too. So I think that's really important for us to focus on for a moment, and that is the way she looked. She had long, beautiful hair, and the hair didn't look like a black woman's hair. So it was extremely attractive to, I think, lots of people, okay? Plus she was light-skinned because of the way, she was conceived. So she was different. She had a beauty about her, a grace about her, and so there we have a character that already stands out and is different physically, as well as someone inside who is becoming even more different as she evolves.
And there's a word for this that I didn't know until today, passing. And this word was used a lot in the Harlem Renaissance, probably not always in a positive sense, but much discussed. And in fact, a few of the playwrights who were creating during that time created some of the Broadway musicals that really seemed to be a parody of what black people should be. So in a way, these were total sellouts. But the theme, in any case, was extremely important to blacks.
And because of the way she passed, that was also an aspect of that contributed to the alienation as well. And because she was in a culture of black people and didn't really know that she was different until she sees a picture of herself.
I think she was 5 years old.
Like, who's that, she goes.
Right.
Okay, so she leaves Logan, and she goes with...
And we have to describe this person.
Okay.
Starks was his last name.
Jody.
Jody Starks was his name. He was a mover and a shaker as well as a dandy. So he wasn't the dandy that simply looked the part. He could look at a situation, size it up, and say, we need to do this, and take charge. So she went with him, and she went to a town called Eatonville, which in reality was where the real Zora, was born and grew up. And it was an all-black town, which was not something that's very common. But in the book, she goes off with this guy, and he actually helps create the town.
Saying, we should have a town here.
They didn't have a mayor. They didn't have a store. They didn't have an electric light bulb.
I'll be the mayor.
Right.
We need a store. Let's build a store.
So this was part of the personality.
Okay.
But there were bad things about it in terms of Zora and Janie.
Absolutely, and extremely driven, hardworking, took on the affect of his importance. And she, as a result, also became important. I mean, she was the mayor's wife, and she was somebody that the community looked to.
So now she went from being the mistress of a 60-acre farm in the backwoods that probably meant very little to someone living in the biggest white house in town that could have passed for the master's house 100 years before. and married to a person who was the most important person in the town, and she felt miserable.
She felt miserable. So the dream did not come true for her when she changed
The quest continued.
The quest continued.
She found something, but it wasn't herself.
Just to divert for a second too, because you talked about the mule image in the first husband's story, but there's also a big mule story in this particular
Quite different.
episode, quite different. You know, and it showed you, I think, an aspect of Jody.
And of Zora.
Yeah, that was kinder, I think, and more considerate. A mule who wasn't really doing his muley duties, was being mistreated. Starved. Yeah, you could. There was something all about the ribs, and all that. And he actually buys the mule from this guy, and sort of sets the mule free. And the mule actually eventually dies, and we have an image of the carcass of the mule, and the vultures eating it away. And I'm sure there's some.
But most importantly, the ceremony of the burial of the mule.
Right. That was big.
And the mayor went out and stood on top of the carcass. This was before the vultures got there.
For the
They had a dragging of the mule out of town.
That's right.
And he gave a beautiful, wasn't really, a beautiful oration about the funeral. Unfortunately, or interestingly, not unfortunately, after he buys the mule, we learn why he bought the mule. And he only bought it for Joni. Well, the person was portrayed as a very selfish person who used her just as a model. In other words, that's my wife, look how important I am. But it showed me another side of him. He really did, at times, I'm just not sure if often enough, care for her some ways.
Yeah, and it's interesting because also we get the strong feeling in her, with her character and how she, I guess, talks more than how she thinks. You know, we know how unhappy she is because she is not getting the life that she has dreamed about. But we don't really know necessarily how she might have thought about this act of kindness, actually. I mean, the narrator, there's a whole structure with this book where the narrator is talking about the picture over here, and then we get the characters themselves talking. So you're right. I mean, it was hard to not like this person totally. I mean, I think culturally, you know, as a man, there's a whole thing through this book about masculinity, you know, and the role of the man, you know, and that role was to be the head of the household, and even if it had to be to beat a wife, or to hit a wife, or to strike a woman, to subjugate her, to put her in her place.
And it was probably the striking with the voice that was the most damaging to Jody, because he did hit her in the end, and she then went into something that we can describe in a moment, but he insulted her in front of people constantly. And the older he got and the more insecure he felt, the more he would insult her.
Just remembered something really important. We talked about her beautiful hair. What did he have her do with her hair?
Cover it up.
Cover it up. Actually wear kerchiefs so nobody saw this, because he knew that if men did see this, so he was jealous as well.
He was very envious and jealous.
So he tried to keep her really contained that way.
And this ran through most of the population, whether it be male or female, although it's described for the most part in the male population. We meet many more males in this than we do females. Phoebe and Jody are about the only two I can think of, and Mrs. Turner, which we'll bring up later.
Right.
But these men were very tortured, I guess I could say, because on the one hand they had been told what to do. They serious lack of self-esteem. Why wouldn't they have a lack of self-esteem? So when they had a chance to put somebody else down, they never passed it up.
Right, and knowing that other men would look at them and understand perfectly, you know, right, this is what, you know, and this would sort of mark them once again as being the man of the house.
Right.
You know.
Now, exactly why he wouldn't want other people to see how beautiful she was and still not be able to have her, I don't quite understand. So there's more to this character than we really
right, and I don't think we're
given.
given that, absolutely not
so.
at all. So what happens here? Here she's already left one man because she doesn't like what's going on. She marries this guy, hopefully, and life isn't really turning out that great for her, even though she has status. But she stays with him.
For 20 years.
For
she stays
20
with him.
years.
In other words, she goes from 22 to 42. You could say those are the best years of most people's lives.
So they're basically just living their lives, and you wouldn't really say that there's love at all involved here.
No, in fact, what she learned the most was that she has an outside and she has an inside. So she knows she has an inside, but it's not allowed to blossom. It's not allowed to grow into anything.
Good point. And you see her several times, I think, here manifesting what she knows she has to show on the outside and feeling absolutely totally different inside. Okay. So what happens in this relationship to keep it moving, keep the story moving?
Well, the story goes on until we really know how unhappy she is, and to get to know why she's unhappy, to finally it coming to a head. The man is sick and dying, and at this point, she points out how old he looks. She finally has had enough because he got so insulting near the end in front of everyone that it became so personal and hurt so much she struck back.
And she doesn't do it just one-to-one. She does it
in front of the town,
she
basically
humiliates him.
So he dies, to make a long story short. But
well, I think
we can lengthen it up.
Yeah, just a little bit, because I think that's significant. She humiliates him. They separate, and when basically she knows he's really going to die, she goes to see him again, and she really spares no mercy. You know, she really tells him outright, reaffirms this feeling of hers, and the fact that, guess what, you're going to die.
She gave him the truth.
She gave him the truth.
For her, that was the most important thing. He wouldn't accept the truth, but she wanted one last chance, and before he wouldn't listen, but now he has no choice.
Okay, so he's dead now, and so she doesn't have somebody, you know, waiting for her. She sort of continues. And
now we go into this period where the town is supposedly worried about her because she's a wealthy woman, and they know there are going to be all these suitors coming, and there are from other towns and all over. But they're also very jealous, and they also would be the suitor if they could. So on the one hand, every man wants to protect her from all the other men and wants her at the same time. And
okay.
She rejects all of that.
Okay. So
until.
And she runs the store right. She's, you know, she does her thing. She has her outward life, and then until one day someone happens to cross her path.
It could be Virgil Woods, or it could be his other name, which is Tea Cake.
Tea Cakes. Okay.
And he's a charmer.
And right away, there's a whole, I think there's a shift in the mood or the feeling of the book, because this guy, you know, is someone who engages her really quickly, in spite of her reluctance, perhaps. There's a checker game. There's the way he unwraps a pack of cigarettes and whatever have you. There's a style about him. He's tall, okay, and they start doing things together, and you start feeling, huh?
In the middle of the night, they go fishing.
They go fishing in the middle of the night, and she's willing to do it, right?
Right.
They really start. You really see that all of a sudden something life is happening, and she's starting to really enjoy herself and likes him.
And this interchange to me is one of the most interesting parts of the book. Not necessarily the most beautiful. It's easy to miss. But the courtship involves some interesting interplays of honesty. And I think that might have been the dart that really stuck in her heart as much as anything.
Right.
He treated her as an equal.
Because we're hopeful that, you know, after these other two, that, you know, this guy is going to be really who she's been looking for. And, you know, she's a cautious woman. There's a scene where, you know, they're together, and she has actually sewed some money into her dress, I believe. And he disappears for a period of time, a long day, whatever have you, overnight, I think it was. And the money is missing too. So reader goes, oh dear, it's going to happen again. And yet he comes back, and she's very reluctant about, you know, really thinking that it's okay. And he explains himself. And he actually shows her, after telling her a few things that I thought were kind of harsh, that in fact he made money. He gambled and he made money, you know. So, you know, he wasn't the creep that we were starting to think he was.
Well, you know, at first we know, because this takes place over a little bit of time. At first he was a creep. I mean, and that's what we experienced. The man took her money, and he goes off and gambles. And the fact that later on he wins it back is kind of like icing on the cake, but she was going to forgive him, and we don't quite know why, because he hadn't even paid her back yet. And I guess that's something that we have to take on faith, because she loves him so much. It's the only thing I can think of.
And here's the word right here, that we now know that there's love here. And, you know, even, you know, you could doubt somebody by saying, I love you, you know, show me kind of stuff. But, you know, here we have two people who are clearly in love with one another. I was struck also in this particular aspect of the book of his need to be with her. He would leave the, what they called the muck, the Everglades. He would leave work in order, because he missed her. He wasn't necessarily checking up on her or thinking she was doing something awful. He wanted to be with her. And he conveyed that to her, and eventually what? She goes and joins him.
In her overalls.
In her overalls. She wears overalls, picking beans, okay?
And most people were impressed by that. I mean, the people that worked alongside of Tea Cake in the fields, and these were not sophisticated people. So what we see in these people are very primitive emotions. Envy and gossip are main features, and fighting is very easy to start.
There's a little flicker moment of jealousy that she has, and she confronts him with another woman, which is circumstantially they were you know, having a struggle over something. Who knows if any more was going on? But she basically told the woman to take a powder, and that really seemed to really cement the two together for the rest of that relationship. Okay.
And I think that's really the key about this relationship, of going into the whys and the wherefores with these two people, and asking questions like, why did she love him so much? Why did she forgive him so easily? What was it about that relationship that was so satisfying? What can we learn from that?
And she was clearly being given the message too that he wasn't somebody that necessarily she should, you know.
No, he was a gambler. He had knives. He was very good with his knife.
So whatever, there was that quality there.
And she adopted this atmosphere that was totally alien to her entire life, because she was hook, line, and sinker in love with him.
One of the themes that come out among the many that are in this book are this whole sense of community. And you know, we have the sort of the image in the beginning of the women on the porch, and her being separated from, not necessarily a part of, going to with Jody and creating the town, having that become a community. Also, that we get the community of the bean pickers. You know, this whole sense of people grouping together, doing the same kind of thing. So there's a strong sense of being involved with other people as well, and what is community and what matters. You know, I recall also when a season changes and there's an episode, you know, in here, and then all of a sudden they come back. Many of the same people came back, some different people came back, but there was a sense of, you know, now my community is, you know, I'm a part of a larger thing now. I think that she opens up and it becomes, you know, greater than just herself.
So maybe that's a good point at which to pose the question: what is this book about? Why is it important? I'm asking a question. Obviously, I have a start of an answer, and one is what you're talking about, the social and the black issue. There is a historical context. She is presenting her people in an honest and brutal light, which was resented, as we mentioned, by some of the promotion-type blacks of the time. And Langston Hughes would have nothing to do with her after that. He was certainly one of the most famous people of the time.
Right.
But she wrapped it all up in a package which, if you really read it carefully, I think you feel human. You feel a humanity and a poetry beyond the smallness of some of the events.
Did a part of you at all identify? I mean, this is a woman's story, really, but it's a person's story. Did you share any, you know, any experiences in this journey, in terms of growth, in terms of a quest, in terms of, let's say, a spiritual journey?
It's a good question. Why I like this book so much? I mean, we can start with that. Obviously, I identified with something. Whether it was the problems that they talked about or just the beauty of some of the language, I think I got to like her And even though I couldn't say I liked Tea Cake, I enjoyed the relationship.
I think we like him because of the way she feels about him, too, and how, you know, as we move along to the big scene, and ultimately his death, the way the love is so pure, I think, and so strong, you know.
You know what? As you said that, I got an image of something. I think I understand now why I like him. Her second husband, Starks, I forget his first name all the time. Jody Starks. He created a town. But Tea Cake, he knew how to create a relationship.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right.
He was the bee in the pollen, but it was her soul that he really ignited.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that helped her find herself.
Now we're moving along. We actually are moving along through the story here, and there's also another the images of nature. There's lots in this beautifully written book, many times just breathtakingly beautiful, I think, in the way very short phrases just convey, you know, the way it is. You know, the way the wind might go through your hair or touch your face, and the bee with the flower. But we have a huge thing happen, a huge aspect of nature occur.
And now that we've lived through New Orleans and that disaster, it seems quite realistic. Lake Okeechobee, which I can't pronounce, but that big lake in Florida in the Everglades
is actually dry right now.
And during
but it was in this book,
it
was
it? Not. No, the wind came up. It was a major hurricane was coming. Most of the blacks, well, I don't know most of the blacks. Many people left. The Indians, the Native Americans left.
They're getting warnings all the way through it.
Yeah, the animals are leaving. The deer are leaving. Some of the black people don't leave. And what they say is the white people aren't leaving. We don't know anything. Those people know. They built this country. They must know. Well, they
so all the signs that are coming their way, they really just don't pay attention to until really all hell breaks loose.
And the dam is breaking.
The dam is breaking.
The levee is
all sorts of things happening. And here in this particular episode, we get the title of the book. Okay, their eyes were watching God, and it occurs when they're, you know, huddling and you know,
there's no electricity. That's
no
gone.
electricity, and the black sky. They're looking up into blackness, and but their eyes were watching God. You know, and this whole idea.
What's going to happen?
Yeah, what's going to happen? But also, who is God? And God being nature, absolutely. You know, not an orthodox God, but this, you know,
how they interpret it.
Huge, powerful force.
Right.
Extraordinary. And then we have an episode with a floating cow and you know, well, a rabid dog.
And this brings on the end, of course.
Right, right. And in the course of all this, and they survive. You know, they're swept away.
They barely
survive. And Tea Cake gets bitten in a struggle with this, what we find out is a rabid dog. Okay, and several weeks later, I believe it's weeks, he starts to manifest the results of that, the symptoms of that. And it's clear by a doctor that he's not going to live.
They waited too long.
Okay, they waited too long. But unlike the second husband, okay, she really, I think she wants to, she knows the truth, but she doesn't want to have him die. Okay.
What any spouse would do, the standard, anything it takes, doctor, bring the stuff anyway. She had hope. And the doctor did. He called down to Miami, and Miami sent serum because they didn't have any more locally. They had so many disasters. And of course it was going to be a waste of time. But she went to get it, and when she got back, she found a tea cake with a gun who was totally out of his mind.
And a little further, you know, more towards the beginning of the book, she also learns how to use a gun. You know, and we were talking earlier, I said,
but that sounds easy.
That was a clue to me. I was saying, you know, this gun's going to, her knowing how to shoot a gun is going to have a play in the story somewhere along the line here.
You've seen a few pieces of theater, I see.
So ultimately he goes into delirium. He's delirious. He's not making sense, and he actually, I think, leaves, and she checks the cartridge of the gun and spins it so that if he were to shoot, that he would actually be shooting nothing, but knew the count to say that when the real bullet would come.
When the fourth one went off, it would be a real one.
Right. So ultimately, what happens is that he's pointing the gun at her. She has a shotgun. Sort of to protect herself, and both guns go off, really, and she kills him, okay? And we were talking before, too, is about, what kept her there?
And how could she shoot him?
Right. I mean, obviously, her life was in danger. She didn't run out the door. But, what kept her there? And do we know how she felt when she,
I don't think so.
No.
I think from reading it, we have to only surmise whether that's a weakness or not. It certainly leads us into some very good scenes. It's been criticized as maybe a little unlikely, but a lot of things are unlikely, and they happen in movies and
but dramatic
all
tension,
the time.
For the sake of the plot
Right.
and all this business.
Right.
But I think it was very dramatic. I mean, it was a very riveting scene. And but there were consequences, or there are consequences as a result of her.
Well, there's a dead person. There's a woman with a gun, and it turns out that, of course, she had to be tried. Was she guilty or not? At this point, hadn't been decided. The black people, almost to a person, felt that she was guilty and she should be hung. And this is a person that they had loved and laughed with for many, many months in some cases. On the other hand, the doctor was completely sympathetic because he had seen what was happening,
right.
Told the sheriff, and so all the white people end up being completely sympathetic. And they have a trial immediately, so the poor woman doesn't have to sit in jail.
And she's exonerated. I mean, she's
totally exonerated.
Not guilty, okay? And this, in effect, brings us right back to what we experienced as the beginning of the book. Her dealing with that, the fact that she's lost him,
she's being judged,
and she's been judged, and she's going forward. So now we understand a little bit more about why perhaps there might have been this feeling towards her. Okay, and we get back to the here and now with the story, and she's talking to Phoebe, and she says something like this. She says, "You can tell them this story if you wanted to. I'm just telling you. You can tell them. Doesn't matter, okay? And you get that sense that there's a completeness in her. There's a wholeness in her. She has gone through her journey. I don't know particularly where she's going to go from here, but this journey is over. She is one with herself. She's fulfilled. She's had love. She knows love, and she's not. Her difference is solid. Okay.
And it's hard to, I guess, completely for me understand why she would be so satisfied. The beautiful image of the end of wrapping herself in the net of the horizon and feeling all of what she was looking for enfold her. She has her memories, I suppose. That's really the content that she has left. But we also have to go back to the beginning when, as you pointed out before, she's looking at the horizon.
Right.
And that's where she started out. And she was thinking in the very beginning, I need to walk to the horizon. And now she's been to the horizon, and I guess she has learned about herself.
And also, too, if you want to get into a spiritual image, too, the horizon being the place where in effect, the sky and the earth meet. That there's a completeness here. It's hers. It's no longer a quest.
And it makes it a circle.
It makes it a circle. Beautiful story. We didn't talk about Mrs. Turner, but just briefly, here's a character who also appears white, a black woman who appears white, and who wants to bring Janie into the fold by saying, stay away from these really black men. In effect, I have a son who's right for you. And there's this racism, you know, internalized really, being better than if you're whiter than the other black people in your community.
Of those people who wanted to be passing, Mrs. Turner was the perfect case. And she hated black people.
She sure did.
Everything they represented.
Sure did. A lot of humor in the story. You know, a lot of you know, interesting characters. You know, sadness, joy, struggle, all sorts of things. You know, for what, a relatively short book, couple hundred pages.
Yep.
Just really a wonderful, wonderful package. You know, makes me want to read more of her, believe it or not.
Well, this was supposed to be her best, but there's some very good short stories as well. And Jonas Gourdvine, which is an earlier book, got enough praise that she was able to write this one. And that's the one that Lippincott picked up and said, oh, well, this person has some skills. Actually, it was the short stories that led to the Lippincott first publication of Jonas Gourdvine, which gave her a check, the magical thing that happened.
And when in the disc that we got here, you know, the money she got was I mean, in my mind, a pittance.
She was struggling even after
$200.
Yeah, even after she was successful, she never had enough money. A horrible thing happened to her in New York City in I believe it was the early 50s. I could be off by any amount of 5 or 6 years. Somebody claimed that she had molested their 10-year-old. It was proven that she wasn't even in the same state at the time. But it was too late. The story was picked up by a major sensationalist newspaper, and she couldn't work anywhere for a while. And then she went into obscurity, which was partly because of the politics of some people questioning, is she a good black? Is she really advancing our cause? And it wasn't until some of the more recent people came along and said, Alice Walker came along and said, this is good.
Thank you, Alice Walker. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, not necessarily autobiographical, but I'm sure there was a lot of her, you know, in the character.
Well, Alice had 2 failed marriages, and she had a relationship with an attractive younger person that didn't go anywhere. I think at this point they realized this is not going to work.
Well, you know, I think we've done it. You know, I just think that, like I said in the beginning, if our viewers haven't read the book, I really think we should encourage them to do so. You know, there is also, I believe, a movie which I haven't seen that
Produced by Oprah, yeah.
that put together that sort of, you know, puts this in sort of a cinematic framework. Maybe I'll see it, maybe not, because really, as a reading experience, this was quite a rich one and a wonderful one. So.
I'm afraid of it for the same reason. It's probably good, but the book is probably better.
Anything you want to say before we end our session?
Perhaps just that if they go to the library or that website or even our website, there is a book discussion group coming up that people are welcome to go to. We've been giving away books at the library that we got through the grant. And so there's probably copies still available. And we just encourage people to enjoy reading it. And if they want to come and discuss it, that'd be great.
Absolutely, and hopefully we'll have another opportunity to do something like this, which is a collective experience. But also, let's plan on talking about a few more books in the future.
Sounds like a good idea.
Okay.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us on Talking About Books. Richard Naylor and Robert Jaquay saying goodbye for now, and hope you join us next time.
Have a great week. Bye.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.